Troops on hand is at odds with Defence Secretary Mark Esper, who says he opposes using the military against US civilians. Donald Trump's former Defence Secretary Jim Mattis went even further, suggesting the US president's actions are a threat to the Constitution. In Minneapolis, all 4 police officers involved in the death of George Floyd are now in custody and charged over his death. The former US President Barack Obama has called for widespread police reform. The protests have spread internationally, with a large rally held in central London. There were some clashes between demonstrators and police, and 2 Australian journalists were attacked on air but were uninjured. On Monday, US President Donald Trump suggested he would consider authorising the use of military force in states that did not effectively protect their residents from looting. US Army units were moved to bases in Washington, D.C. earlier this week, but have not yet been deployed in the city. Senior administration officials have publicly stated such a move is not necessary and should only be considered a last resort. As you heard, US Defence Secretary Mark Esper is pushing back, saying he doesn't support the use of active duty forces, and to do so would undermine public trust.
I say this not only as Secretary of Defense, but also as a former soldier and a former member of the National Guard. The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
The former US President Barack Obama says it's vital to channel the momentum built up by protests to bring about change. He says demonstrations over the death of George Floyd are as profound as anything he's seen. He's called on Americans to seize the chance to deal with the problems in society, including entrenched racism.
This is not a either or. This is a both and. To bring about real change, we both have to highlight a problem and make people in power uncomfortable, but we also have to translate that into practical solutions and laws that can be implemented and we can monitor and make sure we're following up on. And it's very important for us to take the momentum that has been created as a society, as a country, and say, let's use this to finally have an impact.
The United States has a long history of protests against police brutality and racial injustice, but as Planet America's John Barron explains, how authorities and politicians have responded has varied greatly.
The explosion of outrage, protests and in some cases violence that we've seen in America in the past week has followed a rather familiar pattern. An inciting incident, a triggering event, in this case the killing of George Floyd. Peaceful demonstrations, also acts of lawlessness, arson and looting, rioting and more violence. In some cases perpetrated by the police themselves. And as always, there is more to it than the single act that lit the fuse. August 11, 1965, 21-year-old black man Marquette Fry is pulled over with his brother after driving erratically in south-central Los Angeles. Things seem routine, even jovial, until his mother is called to the scene. She reportedly yells at Marquette for being drunk. He tries to run. She somehow gets shoved. Both of them are arrested. A crowd gathers. Within hours, a riot develops in the mostly black Watts neighbourhood. Stores are looted, buildings are set on fire. The riot and the fires rage for 6 days. When the smoke clears, 34 people have died, most of them black, killed by LAPD officers or National Guardsmen. July 12, 1967, Newark, New Jersey. Residents in a large public housing development look on in horror as a black taxi driver, John Smith, is brutally beaten by 2 white police officers and taken to the nearby precinct station. A crowd follows, a rumour starts the cab driver has been killed, although that is soon dispelled. By the next day, a protest over the beating leads to arson, looting and a full-scale riot that continues for 5 days. By its end, 26 people are dead, including a police officer and a fireman, but most of them civilians, mostly black, and mostly at the hands of police. The following week, July 23, 1967, Detroit, Michigan. In the early hours of a stifling hot Sunday morning, police raid an illegal after-hours bar hosting a party for 2 returned black Vietnam War veterans. They arrest the 85 patrons who are ferried away in squad cars. A crowd gathers outside on 12th Street, bottles are thrown, the police retreat, soon thousands spill onto the streets. By 6 a.m, the looting and arson has started. The riots continue for 4 days. 1,700 shops are looted, 1,400 buildings are burned, 5,000 people lose their homes, 43 people lose their lives, almost all of them black, shot by police.
Law and order have broken down in Detroit, Michigan. Pillage, looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights.
That long, hot summer of 1967 saw over 150 other riots erupt across American cities, almost always black and Latino residents against police and National Guard troops, brought in to try and quell the unrest. President Lyndon Johnson appoints Illinois Governor Otto Kerner as the head of a commission on civil disorders. His final report in early 1968 warns,
"Our nation is moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal."
But Kerner also tried to dispel the notion there was something un-American, even communist, about the protests.
Rather than rejecting the American system, they were anxious to obtain a place for themselves in it.
The riots and the killings of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were on the minds of many voters in 1968 when Richard Nixon won the White House, promising to restore law and order.
Let us recognize that the first civil right of every American is to be free from domestic violence. So I pledge to you, we shall have order in the United States.
Some things changed. There was greater scrutiny of police racism and violence, as well as the tactics used to suppress protests and try and minimise rioting. Deep divisions and inequality, though, remained. There were fewer eruptions into chaos in the decades that followed until, almost a quarter of a century later, the deadliest to date. April 29th, 1992, Los Angeles. 4 police officers are acquitted by a jury with no black people on it after being filmed savagely beating a black motorist, Rodney King, for 15 minutes, more than a year earlier. Videotape of the police attack had been seen around the world. Weeks earlier, a 15-year-old black girl, Latasha Harlins, had been shot and killed by a shopkeeper who suspected her of trying to steal a bottle of orange juice. She was clutching the money to pay for it when her body was found. Her killer, who was Korean, was fined $500 and put on probation. Within hours of Rodney King's police attackers being set free, the disturbances in LA began. Many Latinos, as well as African Americans, took to the streets. Korean businesses in particular were targeted. Fires and looting started. A state of emergency was declared by Mayor Tom Bradley.
We cannot and we will not tolerate any violence as a means of expressing anger or concern about the verdict.
At first, though, the police held back. It was later revealed they had no plan on how to deal with this level of civil unrest. LA's notorious street gangs joined in the violence. A white truck driver was dragged from his vehicle, beaten and attacked with a block of concrete. It was all captured live on TV. The following day, Rodney King himself called for calm.
I just want to say, you know, can we all get along? Can we get along? Can we stop making it horrible for the older people and the kids?
And the political stakes were also very high.
There's a real challenge to the president's leadership, and especially in the middle of an election year. How the president is seen to deal with crisis is probably magnified one way or the other.
What followed Wednesday's jury verdict in the Rodney King case was a tragic series of events for the city of Los Angeles.
While President George Bush was steady, his rival Bill Clinton did more to acknowledge the underlying causes of racism and economic inequality.
Rebuilding communities like this is a part of why I want to be president.
The rampage of looting and destruction, assaults and murders continued in Los Angeles for almost a week. More than 60 people were killed, over 2,000 injured, 12,000 arrested, and $1 billion worth of damage was done.
And you can watch Planet America on Friday at 8:15 right here on the ABC News channel. More than 40 people have been injured in a knife attack at a primary school in southern China, reportedly by one of the school's security guards. The local government in the region says 37 students and At least 2 adults suffered injuries in the attack. Chinese state media says the suspect, named only as Li, has been arrested. A German prisoner has been identified as a new suspect in the disappearance of missing British girl Madeleine McCann from a holiday resort in Portugal 13 years ago. The man in his 40s is a convicted sex offender who had been in the region at the time, travelling in a camper van.
This is the Volkswagen camper van that was used by the new suspect in the Madeleine McCann investigation. With its distinctive colours, police hope it will trigger someone's memory and lead to new evidence about their as yet unnamed suspect.
He used the vehicle to live in, and certainly the week preceding he was in there living. So he would move around the area using that van as probably his base.
The suspect also used this Jaguar car at the time. He registered the car into someone else's name the day after Madeleine McCann disappeared. The 3-year-old went missing on May the 3rd, 2007. She'd been sleeping in her parents' holiday apartment while they were 50 metres away having a meal with friends. Her 17th birthday was last month. On the German version of Crime Watch this evening, police there revealed that the suspect has previous convictions for sexually assaulting girls and is thought to have burgled hotels and holiday apartments. He's currently in prison in Germany. His phone was used in Praia de Luz about an hour before Madeleine McCann disappeared. Tonight, the Metropolitan Police are asking for anyone who can help with information about the mobile number he took the call on that night, the VW camper van that he was using that summer, and the old Jaguar XJR6 that he registered out of his name the day after Madeleine McCann disappeared. In a statement, her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, seen here in 2007, said they'd like to thank the police forces involved in Britain, Germany and Portugal. They said they'd never give up hope of finding Madeleine alive. The German police said that theirs is a murder investigation, but Madeleine McCann's parents said that whatever the outcome is, they need to know what happened, as they need to find peace.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has declared a state of emergency after 20,000 tonnes of oil leaked into a river within the Arctic Circle. The spill happened when a fuel tank at a power plant collapsed on Friday. President Putin expressed anger after discovering officials only learnt about the incident 2 days later. The plant is owned by a subsidiary of Norilsk Nickel, which is the world's leading nickel and palladium producer. Brazil has reported another record daily death toll from the coronavirus, with more than 1,300 people dying over the last 24 hours. 32,000 people have died from the virus in the country, but experts say the real figure is probably much higher. There are more than 584,000 coronavirus cases confirmed in Brazil, the highest number of infections after the United States. Several states and cities across the country have begun to ease coronavirus restrictions, despite the World Health Organization warning of the intense rate of infection.